Chapter 10, Section 4, Cell Differentiation. So the human body has hundreds of different types of cells, and every one of them develops from the single cell that starts the process. So it all starts from that egg being fertilized. So how do the cells get to be so different from each other? How do the cells become specialized for different functions? Well, during the development of an organism, cells differentiate into many types of cells. So we all know that organisms start life as just one cell, and then multicellular organisms pass through an early stage of development called an embryo. And this will gradually develop into an adult organism. For some organisms it might take hours, for other organisms it takes years to become an adult. So during this development, the organism's cells become more differentiated and specialized for particular functions. For example, you have plants that have specialized cells. They have specialized cells in their roots, they have specialized cells in their stems, and then they have specialized cells in their leaves. So the roots have to be able to transport materials, the stems store the sugar that's made, and then the cells in the leaves have to capture light and carry out photosynthesis. So what exactly is differentiation? That's the name that's given to the process for the cells becoming specialized. So during development, cells can differentiate into many different types and become specialized to perform certain tasks. These differentiated cells carry out the jobs that multicellular organisms need to stay alive. So if you look at the picture that I have here, you have what's called a blastocyst. I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. And from the blastocyst you have what are called stem cells. And these stem cells develop into pancreatic cells, blood cells, nerve cells, and liver cells. In some organisms, a cell's role is determined at a specific point in development. Here's an example of C. elegans, that's a scientific name, for a microscopic type worm. And if you notice here on the picture, it says the nervous system by the 5th cell division begins to differentiate. By the 8th cell division, some of the cells that secrete the worm's outer covering begin to differentiate. And then after the 9th or 11th cell division, cells in the feeding organ differentiate. Now differentiating in mammals is a little bit different. It's controlled by different factors in the embryo. And once an organism becomes an adult, usually that's when the differentiation kind of stops and is considered complete. So what are these stem cells? Well, these are unspecialized cells that the differentiated cells will develop, and they're known as stem cells. So one type of stem cell can be called totipotent, meaning that it's literally able to do everything. In other words, it can form all tissues in the body. Normally, these are the first cells that are developed after the egg is fertilized. Those are the only ones that are truly totipotent. Now, after about 4 days of development, the embryo forms a little ball. It's a cluster of cells, and it's called a blastocyst. I had mentioned a little bit earlier. And the inside of this cluster of cells is known as the inner cell mass. Now, the cells that are inside of there are said to be pluripotent, meaning that they can develop into many different types of cells, but not all, like the totipotent ones. So stem cells are unspecialized cells that develop into differentiated cells. You have two types of stem cells. You have adult stem cells, and then you have embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells obviously are found in that inner cell mass of the early embryo, and they are considered pluripotent. Now, researchers have been able to grow human embryos in culture. We've talked about in vitro fertilization before. And these embryonic stem cells have the capacity to produce pretty much any type of cell in a human body. Now, adult stem cells are multipotent. They can't necessarily turn into all the different types of cells, but they can turn into or be differentiated into many different types. So for instance, you might have stem cells from the liver, and those will turn into liver cells. Stem cells from the nerves will turn into nerve cells. So what's the benefit of this stem cell research or being able to make stem cells? Well, they can be used to replace cells that were either damaged or that need repair. Now, it's controversial as far as stem cell research from embryos is controversial because it involves ethical issues of life and death. Now, some benefits of stem cell research include ways to repair cell damage that resulted from heart attacks, strokes, spinal cord injuries. Here's an example of a heart attack damage and how it can be helped with stem cell research. So the stem cells are filtered from bone marrow and removed from a person's hip. And these stem cells are injected into the heart's damaged areas. And then this environment, so this is the environment of the heart that stimulates those stem cells to differentiate into new heart muscle cells. So if we have the pluripotent stem cells, they can be used for bone marrow, leukemia, chemotherapy, nerve cells for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, heart muscle cells, pancreatic cells when we're talking about diabetes. They could use it to study cell differentiation, which could help with birth defects. They can use it for toxicity testing, in other words, to see what different substances can be toxic to humans. And they can use it to identify drug targets, in other words, what drugs will work on certain types of cells. As far as ethical issues, the big problem with embryo or embryonic stem cells is the technique that is used with them always destroys the embryo. So this is really important as far as a political issue. And there's groups that seek to protect the embryos, and they oppose stem cell research because they think it's unethical since it does destroy the embryo. Then there's other groups who support stem cell research, and they think that it's unethical not to do stem cell research. So it's important that you know about stem cells and what they are, because probably in a couple of years you'll be voting on these issues.